The Chaco realm was massive. You know, in probably the mid-1000s, it spanned an area larger than, than Delaware. It was a really large regional network. I look at it like a really dispersed ideology network and exchange network and belief network. There were some massive droughts in the 1120s, around 1150, and the nature of life in the Southwest is that life's very precarious when things go wrong climatically. And so I think that a couple major episodes of drought doomed the Chaco system because it was so widespread. When things go wrong, you usually look to the leaders and you give them a couple chances. And I think after the second chance in the 1100s, people were tired of giving their resources centrally to a belief system, to a regional system that wasn't paying back. And it dissolved. People didn't disappear though, they just moved. A lot of them moved up to the San Juan River near Farmington, New Mexico. Others moved up to what is now Mesa Verde in southwest Colorado. DNA and archaeology has had a real checkered past. Anthropology in general. There was a study with the Havasupai in Arizona that went sideways when blood samples were taken to look at diabetes, and then they were used to look at ancestry and look at inbreeding and all the things that had not been approved. And I'll talk today about a study in 2017 where people, the reason we have data from Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon is archaeologists and geneticists sampled remains that were dug up in 1896 and were in the American Museum and were considered to be unaffiliated, even though they were from Pueblo Bonito, and there are 19 tribes that claim affiliation there. And they sampled them without asking tribal members from all those 19 tribes, and it was a really unfortunate lack of communication. What we did though, we structured our research very specifically so we looked only at individuals from Picuris Pueblo. So we were not asking other tribes because they were excavated from Picuris. And every step of the way, every decision that was made was Picuris's. It was structured so that at any point, even tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of research effort into it, they could have yanked the plug at any time. And we structured it purposefully so they would have complete control. The fact I get to talk about this today is because they give me permission to talk about it. Science should share its methods, its knowledge, but the people who it directly benefits and could harm should be in control. And scientists aren't used to that. Scientists are used to posing a question that comes from their heads, coming up with answers, and then publishing them. And so the lesson for me here is that the people whose heritage this affects are and should be in control, and they should be the ones asking the questions. The question, are we related to Chaco Canyon, did not come from us. It came from them. And as you'll hear, it came about because they were getting increasingly fatigued with having another request from the US government, are you related to Chaco? And they said, we've been playing this game for decades. Is there a way to finally show that we're related, other than oral tradition and our material technology? And so this, as they put it, we're going to play with scientific tools now to show the government that we're related, and they did. It benefits a tribe because one, it verifies, we don't need to verify their oral tradition, but it does support it. They wanted to show that they haven't been making things up. They also have a vested interest in protecting Chaco Canyon. I don't know if you know, but it is one of the most actively drilled for natural gas locations in the United States. And so there's a 10-mile buffer that the last administration put in place to protect Chaco. It's not nearly enough. The Chaco realm is much larger. So Picuris wants to protect it. And just 3 weeks ago, they sent a letter to the Department of Interior saying, we're related, you need to cease and desist until you ask us. I think everybody deserves as true and as ethical a history as possible, ethically gained. And also that that there is astounding amounts of understanding that still I think we're in need of. We're all related. We all have had similar trajectories in terms of peoples, cultures, ups and downs, and there's so much more that joins us than divides us. And archaeology shows that we've made the same mistakes over and over and over again. We've had the same triumphs elsewhere in the world over and over again. And we're a pretty bizarre and wonderful species. I love studying it. I love telling people about the past. I grew up in Montana, and so a lot of the friends I had are indigenous, Native American, and that to me, understanding that there's such a difference in their ancestry, but we're all living together now, was I think pretty striking to me. And here was a profession where I could dig in the dirt and be outside, and that's important to me. Thank you. He promised to let my family go after I speak. Is that true? No, it's an honor to be here. And I want to start by saying none of this would have been possible 20 years ago. This is all astoundingly new technology, approaches, capabilities. So I'll talk a little bit about genetics. I am not a geneticist, so I'll talk more about the archaeology and some of the ethics of what we've done. Obviously, DNA is not identity. DNA is our ancestry. It's the ancestors who got together long enough and intensely enough to be able to procreate. And so this DNA inside our cells obviously holds a blueprint of how we build ourselves, half from mom, half from dad. And genetics really is just the study of how this information has been inherited. It's really important, though, again, to differentiate between the identity and the genetics, because, again, what I'll be talking about is identity that comes in part from ancestry, and now being able to look at genetic evidence of ancestry is bolstering so much of the oral traditional knowledge of indigenous folks, especially in the American Southwest. Genetics can tell us astounding amounts about, again, the genetic ancestry, the relatedness of people. It's a very simple map, again, showing migrations out of Africa 60,000 years ago into Europe. We now think in the Americas had the first peopling about 25,000 to 15,000 years ago. So again, what Florence Hawley-Ellis told us 60 years ago changes all of the time. I want to point something out that the experts who talk about this really always forget to say. That's the evidence of people who made it. There may have been earlier people who flamed out, who didn't make it, who couldn't find anybody to continue their genetic ancestry. So these are the successes that we're talking about here, folks. So I'll be talking about, again, Chaco Canyon. The state of New Mexico here. This is the Rio Grande. Picuris Pueblo is at the headwaters of the Rio Grande up here. Chaco Canyon, due west, about 160 miles. Due west from there, Hopi Mesas. Most of the pueblos today, ancestral Pueblo and present-day pueblos, are along the Rio Grande here. And here we go, to the Rio Grande. And we'll be talking about that. Chaco is a World Heritage Site. It is the Mecca. It's the Jerusalem of the Pueblo world. It is incredibly important for their knowledge, their ancestry, their identities today. It's the largest cluster of architectural features in the American Southwest, and an astounding place. If you can go there, go. If you have been there, you're one thing off your bucket list. It is a desolate place today. I'm glad they haven't paved into Chaco yet, because it's worth the pilgrimage to get in here. This is, again, looking to the east. This is the unexcavated great house of Peñasco Blanco, and then Chaco Wash with the north escarpment and the south escarpment. This is as it looks today. It is not a place to go when you want shade. Pueblo Bonito. I'll be talking about Pueblo Bonito. This is the archetypal great house. And when I say great house, I'm talking about a community-built structure that had what we can best call sacred architecture infused into the rocks and beams of the place. This is a 300-year history of building on belief and building for belief and building for leaders. And again, you can see here a massive arched pueblo with a center wall in the middle here, and it began as a small arc of rooms. The architects kept that floor plan for 300 years, and the result is Pueblo Bonito. It is part of a massive sacred landscape, and by massive, I mean hundreds of thousands of square kilometers that stretch in all directions from Chaco Canyon. So when we say Chaco Canyon, we're talking about the center of a regional political belief ideological system that ran from about 900 to about 1150 AD. It is, again, to the modern Pueblo people, their Mecca. This again is an artist's reconstruction of what Pueblo Bonito would have looked like. Importantly, you see out in front, there are, those are midden areas, trash areas, where the architectural refuse from building this place were placed, and it was formally made into platform mounds. So there's a lot of performative space here. It is surrounded by other monumental architectural features. This is Casa Rinconada, a great kiva. Again, all masonry, 60 feet across. You can see here, there are people in there for scale. These were built, again, as part of a massive belief system that held sway over this part of the American Southwest, the indigenous Southwest, about 1,000 years ago. The thing to know about great houses is they were completely over-engineered. They were meant to stand for all time, and they do stand today. But there is, when I say sacred architecture, there is more effort put into these than needed to be put in. You have these huge footing trenches that are built to support these massive masonry walls. You have not a whole lot of kitchen space. These things are big empty rooms. Hence, a lot of us archaeologists believe that, again, this was a pilgrimage center. This is where people came to stay for a while, be housed, be fed, and provide their labor, and provide their efforts to build other great houses, again, in the support of this belief system. They have roofs and beam structural features that are way over-engineered. And what always amazes me is you have this core and veneer architecture, some of the most amazing masonry you can find anywhere in the world, and they covered it with mud when they were done. So there was a way to build these things that wasn't to shock and awe, it was more the way they were built, which was important. So here you see the masonry styles through time at Chaco Canyon, and one of the later called McElmo style on the right. Again, roofs that were over-engineered. They did not need to put tens of thousands of beams into these roofs. They were built that way so that they could be, again, a celebration, if you will, of the process of construction. And these beams were carried from 40 to 50 miles away into Chaco Canyon. Not dragged. There are no drag marks on them. They were carried. And I think that again bespeaks to the care with which this architectural manifestation was carried out. This is called the Gambler's Room in Chaco Canyon. This gives you an idea of the extent. Here's Chaco Canyon. Here's the extent of architectural features that we call great houses across northwestern New Mexico into southeastern Utah, southwestern Colorado, and on into Arizona. A massive area. And I'll mention these alignments here. These are what we call Chaco roads. Were they roads for commerce, for carrying logs? I would say no. These are pilgrimage routes. These are processional routes. These take you out from Chaco Canyon to sacred directions, to sacred locations. So again, this whole landscape was built to celebrate the Pueblo culture of the time. These great houses are built on prominences. You can look at any mesa out in this area, any mountaintop, and it'll have a great house on it. They were meant to be awe-inspiring, high, and toward the heavens. I would say that the Chaco regional system was one that shared beliefs, that shared economy, that shared efforts, and also led likely by a ritually sanctified lineage of leaders. These folks, and I'll talk about them later, had, I would say, the power to request and to get people to build these amazing testaments to belief all over the Southwest, all over the Chaco region, and they figure into our story here. This is one of the Chaco roads near Pueblo Bonito, built simply by taking the dirt off of the bedrock and moving it to the side. These things are arrow straight, and that's why I say they're probably not for commerce. If you're going to go on these roads, you're not going to be carrying things. It's directionality that they're celebrating. When they reach a cliff, they go straight up the cliff. There are steps cut in there. So it's all about distance and viewpoint. Here's LiDAR that's been used to show some of these processional routes leading out from one of the great houses here up on top of the mesa, and these radiate out into sacred directions and are meaningful for the Chacoans. Here's a Chaco great house in southwestern Colorado called Lowry Ruin. This is probably about 70 miles away from Chaco by air and is built in exactly the same style as these great houses in Chaco Canyon. So in other words, think of this, as sort of the VFW halls or the Eagles Lodges of the rural Pueblo world. Everybody had one. Everybody built one to celebrate the belief in community, the belief in effort that they all shared. Now, getting into the DNA. In 1896, the Hyde expedition was funded by Eastern museums and donors to send folks out, archaeologists out, to excavate in places like Pueblo Bonito, to bring things back for the burgeoning economy that we called museums in the American East, especially. And the Hyde expedition excavated in Pueblo Bonito in the late 1800s, and in this room right here, 33, and adjacently in 32, they found some of the most amazing assemblages associated with human remains that have ever been found anywhere in the ancestral Pueblo world. Tens of thousands of turquoise beads, turquoise containers, vessels that were built most likely for cacao. These folks were trading so widely that you have cacao showing up from Central America in and being used probably as part of ceremonies. This was a widespread network, folks. So in this room 33, about a dozen individuals that were interred, and this has taken a long time to interpret, but we now know they were interred over 300 years. This was a burial crypt for leaders of Chaco Canyon. The founders were buried at the bottom. They were covered with boards. The next lineages, their descendants, were then buried on top of them, and all of these goods continued to be deposited here again in Pueblo Bonito. Now, in 2017, a group of archaeologists, geneticists, published the results of what they found associated with these amazing riches. Again, some of the materials, glycymerous shells, some from the coast of California, others from elsewhere across the western United States. Turquoise encrusted baskets. This is room 33. And let me just go back and show you, this is the oldest part of Pueblo Bonito. So essentially these individuals are laid to rest in the oldest part. This is nothing new, folks. We celebrate this building because of its age, because of its splendor. They've been doing this for a long time. This is not unique to any culture. So they took these old structures here and they used them as the burial crypts and placed these goods in there. 2017, Doug Kennett and some of my colleagues publish ancient DNA, mitochondrial DNA, which again, mitochondrial DNA goes through the female line. So you can figure out female lineages from mitochondrial DNA. They did a study, and what they established was that this was a matriline, that those 300 years of burials, all of those people were related through the maternal line. And they called it a matrilineal dynasty. Here's the problem. They did not consult with the federal tribes who have claimed and been recognized as having cultural affiliation. In other words, lineal and cultural affiliation with Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon. So this was done without permission, and there's a law called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act that basically says you have to consult with affiliated tribes before any destructive analysis is done. It was not done. The archaeologists, their explanation was, well, we had asked and we got no responses back and we didn't know who was affiliated with these individuals, so we tested them. Katrina Claw and other Native American scholars wrote several articles about ethical concerns, and rightly so. This was not done in a way that we would request it would be done today. And so here's the problem. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once the data came out in this Nature article, it was out. And so while obviously it was not done in a way that a lot of tribes would have requested, it was done. So in 2020, I've worked with Picuris Pueblo, doing archaeology with them for about 30 years. And during one slightly contentious meeting with their civic government, I wasn't the contentious one, it was contentious because the tribal government had gotten yet another letter from the US government saying, we would like to see if you are culturally affiliated with Chaco Canyon. Why is this important, folks? There is a lot of energy development going on around the San Juan Basin, and Chaco Canyon's right in the middle of it. And so a lot of tribes have requested that the oil and gas development be tamped down and limited. So within 10 miles of the World Heritage Site, Chaco Canyon, they requested a buffer zone. So the government wrote yet another letter to all the affiliated tribes saying, tell us if you're affiliated. And the governor lost it, threw the letter down and said, what do we have to do to show the US government that these are our ancestors? We have given oral traditional testimony. We've shown how our material culture, our pottery is linked. What else can we do? And he looked at me and said, can we do that DNA stuff? And I blinked several times and said, yeah, probably, but do you want to? No other tribes are doing this. You are going to be a scapegoat. You are going to get vilified by other tribes. You're going to be called names. And he said, I don't care. We're the smallest tribe here in the Southwest. There are only 300 tribal members in Picuris Pueblo. We are used to being beat up. We're going to do something different. And at that time, one of the reasons I was there at the meeting is we had found a locked closet on our SMU-in-Taos campus. We have a satellite campus of SMU in right outside Taos, New Mexico, 20 minutes from Picuris. And their history, as I'll show you, of archaeology involves us because we store and have stored all of their excavated materials for the past many decades. And we found a locked closet, literally, with skeletons in it. And they were from Picuris Pueblo, and they had been excavated by Dr. Herbert Dick in the 1960s and not returned to Picuris. And I was actually there to return them, and that's when the governor said, let's do this DNA stuff. Picuris Pueblo. Here, situated right on the other side of these mountains, is Taos, New Mexico. This is Penasco, New Mexico, off to the side. This is arguably the oldest continuously occupied settlement in the Southwest, if not the nation. They have been there on the same location for 1,100 years. So they beat Acoma Pueblo by a couple hundred years. Sorry, Acoma. The old part of their village is right up here, and their modern housing is down here and up on the hill. They have a long history with archaeology, but that history goes even farther back, obviously, with European contact to Castanha de Sosa, who, hearing in the late 1500s that there was this really big village up in the mountains north of Santa Fe, took horses in the middle of winter, rode up there, and got to Picuris Pueblo in January of 1591. And I love it because it's one of the biggest non-events in culture contact that I think there is. Castanha de Sosa and his retinue came up to Picuris Pueblo, looked up the hill, again, coming in right around here, looked up the hill, saw this massive adobe pueblo, and went up to the pueblo. It had a wall around it. One gentleman came out, looked at them, went back, closed the gate, and that was it. So de Sosa went over to a hillside where some other tribes, non-Pueblo tribes, were camped, probably for trading purposes, and spent the night. And when he got up in the morning and went back over to Picuris, everyone, and I mean everyone, thousands of people, probably a population of 2,500 to 3,000 people, were on the roofs of Picuris Pueblo with bows, arrows, rocks, ready to go to war. De Sosa only had a dozen folks. He did the right thing. He turned around and went to Santa Fe. That was it. This is just a little portion, a 3D rendering of what Picuris would have looked like. These, Castanha de Sosa said there were 7 to 9 stories of architecture. Probably a little bit of overestimation, but these were massive multi-story structures that when you look up the hill from where he was, would have been incredibly imposing. This is just about a third of the village. Why are there only a third of the buildings? Because not everything's been excavated. We still don't know where all of the buildings are. In 1903, A.C. Vroman, doing his photographic tour across the Southwest, went to Picuris and took this astounding photograph. This is 3 stories of adobe architecture still standing, probably from the 1500s. This is what de Sosa would have seen. But it was already falling apart, already decomposing. People had moved out of these buildings and moved into other structures by then. This is what Herbert Dick, the archaeologist who've done most of the work at Picuris Pueblo in the early 60s, saw when he first came to Picuris. He came to Picuris to see about the potential for excavations there, to do work there, and what he found on the surface was pottery that he knew took the occupation of that place back at least 1,000 years. And so he asked the people of Picuris and the tribal leadership whether he would have the privilege of digging there. And what he said was, you have about 50 to 60% unemployment right now. I can employ people to help me excavate. I can bring tourists here. They will bring the economy to you. And so he was approved. And so he was asking questions about how old it is, who are they exchanging with, pretty basic archaeological questions. And he started digging. And the first test pit he dug went down 16 feet. That's a lot of cultural material to build up. So he knew that this probably went back from the present all the way back to the 10th century CE. And here is Herb looking at this test pit wall. He hired people. He excavated starting in 1961, and for 4 years excavated the most of any living Pueblo anywhere in the Southwest, probably almost any indigenous community in the Americas. And you can see here some of the folks who are now elderly like I am. They were kids back then helping Herb dig. This is digging in a kiva, which is their subterranean ritual structure. And he dug about 14 kivas and about 180 surface rooms. And this was full excavation, folks. He did not come and put a test pit in and leave it at that. He excavated entire room blocks. So these are the foundations, the basements, if you will, of these multiple story structures that he excavated. Why did he dig all of it? Not only for data, but also to bring tourists. So they could see this astounding set of complex of buildings that were occupied. And it's hard to see, but here are the excavations. These squares here are all the rooms. This is a big trench dug to put the water line in. All of these trenches to put water lines in, huge room blocks. And this is probably about 1/4 of the actual village. As I said, we repatriated what I thought was all of the remains from Picuris Pueblo in the early 1990s after NAGPRA passed. I did not know of the locked closet that Herb Dick had used to store the rest of the remains. It was actually beneficial because what it allowed Picuris to do then is in 2020 decide to do DNA research. So again, when we returned these remains, the tribal council decided that ancient DNA research would be the way to go. Who did we call? Well, I teach with this guy at SMU, David Meltzer, one of the preeminent Paleo-Indian archaeologists in America. And he works with Eski Villerslev and Eski's students, Victor and Tomas. They're here in Copenhagen. We're here in Dallas. Victor hails from Mexico. Tomas comes from Brazil. And we called them and said, we have a tribal community that's interested in doing DNA research. Would you partner with them? And SK, running the Globe Institute for Geogenetics, said yes. And here you just see where they work. And this is one of the reasons that we called SK. He has an incredible track record in groundbreaking, cutting-edge research. Kennewick Man, one of the earliest American skeletons recovered in Washington in the 1990s, he sequenced Kennewick Man and was able to establish that this very early 9000 CE skeleton was in fact related to the Colville and Umatilla tribes living in that part of Washington today. And here's what I'm probably the most proud of. The fact that this is science in the service of an indigenous community. What we decided, along with Picuris from the very beginning, is that they would be in control 100% of every step of this research, and that when the research was completed, if they allowed it, they would control all the data, they would control when, where, and how it gets published, and they would control the data from that point on, even after publication. So the agreement was that they would work with the Globe Institute, and this let SMU off the hook because having an agreement with a sovereign tribal nation can be somewhat frightening to the legal counsel. So we got a nation of Denmark to sign on to a collaboration with a nation of Picuris. And Picuris owns the data in perpetuity. In fact, even after this was done, any researcher who wants to use these data has to get permission from Picuris, and only to check our work. They cannot use the data for anything else, any other study. Picuris was adamant about this because they're very wary of how their ancestry, their genetics might be used or used against them. And so they control this, and I'm very proud that they continue to control this. The other a little bit harrowing about this is that at any point, every time we had a touch point with Picuris, we asked the very simple question, do you want us to continue? And they had every right to say no. They decided to go forward every time we had those touch points. And this all culminated this spring in March with the publication of this work in Nature magazine. So, a little bit about what we found out. We used DNA from Picuris ancestors. Herb Dick had excavated about 25 individuals that were in this closet. In the end, only about 16 of those actually had genetic material. We also, very importantly, elicited and got modern samples, saliva samples, from living members of Picuris Pueblo. Why? Because not only do we want to establish ties to ancestry, but we want to make sure that those ties are unbroken throughout time. In other words, the people of Picuris have been the people of Picuris for the past 1,100 years. So this is destructive, minimally destructive, but you need about 1/20th of a teaspoon of salt, that size of human bone. Still, it is destruction. There are tribes today, and there will continue to be tribal nations who say this is no amount of destruction is worth this sort of research. I respect that. That is absolutely their sovereign right. Picuris decided it was worth the sacrifice. Again, we tried to get DNA from about 22 individuals. 16 of those efforts were successful. To be able to put this in context, what we did is we compared genetic data from Picuris, ancestors and modern, to 299 different populations, a worldwide sample. And over 5,000 individuals, known DNA sequences were compared. Now, you can't see it very well. There's a V-shaped graph here, but this is, as I'll show you, one dot is one individual. And when you have a dot next to another dot, those folks are more closely genetically related than to others. So again, it washes out here, but this is the group of the sample that is of African ancestry, European and West Asian, Siberian and East Asia. Again, these are sort of the areas where the first Native Americans originated. And here you have indigenous American ancestry, both north and south. Here's Picuris, ancient and modern, and Pueblo Bonito. So here you have South America and North America. So you can see how these separate out in terms of genetic distance. So when we take just the two clusters to the left and hone in on them, there you have South America to the left, Picuris in the middle, and then North America down to this side. So again, for us to be able to say anything about Picuris through time, we had to establish that Picuris has been Picuris genetically through time. And this graph simply shows this huge spike here. These are the ancient and the modern DNA profiles of these individuals. They are absolutely, there's no question that there hasn't been any population replacement at Picuris Pueblo. And here was the exciting part. Again, we started this because they had the question, the community of Picuris, are we related to Pueblo Bonito? Can we establish this genetic relationship so we can tell the US government and everybody who asks us whether we're related? So what we established is that without a doubt, ancient and modern individuals from Pueblo Bonito. Again, this is the farthest northeast Pueblo you can get from Pueblo Bonito. As far as you can get in the Pueblo world, these folks have the genetically closest population to ancient individuals from Pueblo Bonito with our present sample. Well, let me stop a minute and also tell you the ethical conundrum that we faced. When we, SK, David, I, the team SK, came up with these, with the genetic data from Picuris Pueblo and the success of the genetic data, we were torn whether we should use Kennett's data from Pueblo Bonito. As I said, those data were collected with methods that would not fly today. And so we were really twisted up ethically about whether to compare the Picuris data to the Pueblo Bonito data because of the questionable nature of the Pueblo Bonito data. And we finally decided we need to figure this out with Picuris Pueblo, and it's one of the watershed moments I remember in my professional life where on Zoom with Picuris Pueblo we asked this question, and the governor just looked at us dumbfoundedly and said, "That's not your call, that's our call. Of course you're going to use the data. Don't even think about not using the data. If it's out there, we want our genetics compared to them." And it was one of those, duh, we should have realized this, again, wasn't our call. So again, just some graphs to show, again, here you have ancient and modern Picuris Pueblo and Pueblo Bonito. Way down here on this cladogram, meaning that the closest genetic relationships are to ancient and modern northern Mexico. makes sense. They're next door. California, but Bonito and Picuris, absolutely related. So again, back to room 33 in Pueblo Bonito. Here was one of the kind of blink and look at the data moments. Here are 3 individuals from Pueblo Bonito. Here's one of the modern Picuris individuals. Folks, these are maternally related. So not only is there a matriline in Pueblo Bonito, one of the people living at Picuris today is part of that matriline. So what else can we say about Picuris' ancestry using these data? Demography, population structure. Using genetic data, we can say something about how many people lived in the past and again contributed to this genetic pool in one area. Starting back 1200 BC, they can retrodict this population. There have been about 10,000 people involved as a genetic pool in this area since 1200 BC. And here's, again, one of those things that shows how powerful genetic data are. 1300, here's 1300, or here's years and 1600. So in other words, year 0, Christian era, modern Picuris, floor drops out. We know from colonial records that the population of Picuris went from 3,000 people in 1600 to 300 people in 1700. Look at this astounding drop. So genetics, again, are showing that we knew what historically, but showing it with these powerful genetic data. 85% of the people lost within 100 years. One of the other things that Picuris was very interested in was their relationship to populations that we call Southern Athabascan. When we say Southern Athabascan, we're talking about groups down here in the Southwest that speak the Athabascan language, Navajo, Apache, and so on. These are modern groups, again, who are related to Northern Athabascan groups, and at some point in the past split off from their homeland up here in the Northwest coast and moved down into the American Southwest. There's been a great deal of archaeological questions about the ancestry of that move and the timing of that move. And what these genetic data show is that these humans from Picuris Pueblo, these ancestors that date between about 1100 and 1500 AD, so everything pre-Hispanic, before European contact, there is no Athabascan admixture in that sample. Only in the modern Picuris sample is there admixture. So what this shows is that Picuris Pueblo, prior to 1500, did not have any of the Athabascan, the genetic material we associate with Athabascan populations. And in fact, what we see is that Athabascan populations integrate into Puebloan populations starting around the time of Spanish contact, so 1500, 1600 CE. And so modern individuals at Picuris have this north component, but not a whole lot. None of the ancient individuals have this. So what this tells us is that at least in the sample of people that we were able to sequence, there is no non-Pueblo genetics. Now, again, to pause for a minute, this did not sit well with some of the tribal nations, the Navajo, the Apache, who have their own ancestral traditions about when they came into the area, how long they've been there, what ancestry they share with the Pueblos. So that's, again, not to counter their identities, but genetically, we don't have evidence of those populations integrating in much more before Spanish contact. So, of course, we got requests, or we got queries from the Navajo and Apache saying, how can you say this about us And we just let Picuris field those questions because, again, the answer is it's about our ancestry, not about we didn't go look for your ancestry. We just haven't seen it in our ancestry. So before 1400, we have Puebloan people. 1450 to 1600, we have a small group of Athabascan people coming into the area. And small, we can tell that genetically. They get swamped by Puebloan genetics, if you will. And today, here you have Southern Athabascan in blue and Puebloan. You have admixture, but again, it's minor. Now, how am I doing for time? Here's where I think it gets even more fascinating. Back to S.K. Villerslev. In the past 5 or 6 years, he has developed this approach called environmental DNA. He and his lab can now extract DNA from the soil. You don't need to grind up human bone. He is now getting DNA, plant, animal, and human DNA from soils where he is tested. And it's wizardry to me, but he's doing it. So, 2016, when I was directing our SMU-in-Taos campus, I got a call from the governor of Picuris Pueblo, Craig Quancello, and Craig said, we have taken the roof off of our kiva, this ritual structure right here. This was taken in, I think, 1905, this photograph. This kiva, they took the roof off. It needed a new roof. And he said, would you come over here and take samples of the beams from the roof? We want to know when our ancestors built that kiva. So, grabbed my saw and trowel, hopped in the truck, drove 20 minutes to Picuris, and indeed they had taken the roof off the kiva. This is a space that no non-tribal member can go in. They asked me to hop down in there. I said, well, then you have to kill me. And they said, no, it's not sacred when the roof's off. You can go in there. So I hopped down in there, and I'm an archaeologist, I'm a preservationist. They were pickaxing the floor to put a new floor in. And it was like watching a Picasso get shredded. And so I said, may I please take a sample of the floor, just as big as this podium, this size. Sure, go ahead, take the dirt. And so I said, okay, took my trowel, took my shovel, and said, okay, here is sterile soil, about 10 centimeters down. So that's this much floor that has been deposited over, well, we don't know how long. We sent the tree ring sample off. It came back. That tree, holding up the kiva roof, was cut in 1611 AD. It was a big ponderosa pine. It started to grow before Columbus was born. That guy who got discovered by Native Americans, Columbus. Sorry. Happy Indigenous Day, happy Columbus Day. I'm going to do both. We were allowed to take, again, a sample of this kiva floor. And when we found out the date, which we established with tree rings and carbon-14 dating, we realized that we had 400 years of floors in that kiva. So again, we sent that off to SK and his wizards in Denmark. And environmental DNA is so cool because you don't have to destroy bone, but you can see when you leave here, your DNA is going to be sitting right where you were, whether you like it or not. So all organisms are leaving DNA behind. DNA accumulates in the soil. If you get good preservation, like the astounding preservation we have at Picuris Pueblo, when the environment goes away, the DNA stays. And so we can see through the DNA what was there before. Here is this gorgeous 8 centimeters of kiva floor. This is actually the base of the floor. So I turned it over. This floor was built by laying down pine boughs, putting mud on top of it, and then continuing to build up the floors over the next 400 years. And so these pine boughs, we carbon dated 1600. Perfect. So here's time, 1610 to 2016. And here's some of the plants that are coming out of these sediments. As you might expect, maize, corn, beans, the New World Triad, maize, beans, and squash. They were really interested in this. This is native tobacco. They use this, and they have used this for their rituals. Sunflower, chenopodium, amaranth, amazing. These were found in all of the levels. Here's something that's missing, folks. What do you see missing from here? Well, we got people. Wheat, barley, European crops aren't showing up in these soils. To me, that's fascinating because traditionally, when you go into the kiva, you are not supposed to eat any non-native foods. They may have had that tradition since Europeans came and brought those European crops. You also have sagebrush, reeds, coyote willow, lots of things being used for basketry and for other uses. Curiously, ragweed. Y'all have allergies? Ragweed's a pioneer plant, so it's really pretty cool. When they dug this kiva, folks, it disturbed the soil. Ragweed moved into that disturbed soil, and through time, it basically was no longer a pioneer species context. And so it died out and was replaced with other plants. So we're seeing actual logical patterns of plants. Datura, highly hallucinogenic plant, a nightshade plant used for rituals. This shows up in only one level here. It's probably just sampling, folks. We only have this much of a huge kiva floor. Corn smut. This is a delicacy. This is a fungus that grows on corn. And interestingly, when we presented this to Picuris a couple weeks ago, they said, you know, my grandma used to make this stuff and we can't find it anymore. It doesn't grow on our corn plants because we keep buying our corn from Walmart. And that's all GMO. And so it doesn't grow. So they are really excited about reintroducing this because it's a delicacy that they love to eat. It's grown all over Mexico, but not at Picuris Pueblo. Animals, humans and rodents in every level. You'd expect that. This is underground. Animals, humans live there, and mice. Most layers have turkey and mule deer. We're looking for bison. Bison were definitely hunted by the people of Picuris in prehistory and history. And so we're looking for bison because bison hides, bison meat, and so on. Golden eagle and beaver, probably part of ritual assemblages. Today, dancers have beaver pelts on their costumes. Today, and in prehistory and history, golden eagles were used not only for fanning as feather fans, but also for flutes. Their arm bones used for flutes. So we're seeing evidence again of these species. Can we say something about human and maize DNA? Well, guess what? The human DNA takes us right back to Chaco Canyon. Again, completely linked to Chaco Canyon. The maize, interestingly enough, again, this is the maize from Picuris, is related to the ancestral strains of maize that you find. These are maize from eastern United States and other parts of the US, so they are clustering exactly where they should be. Here's what Picuris is excited about. We want to return strains of maize that they had used ancestrally that may be cold adapted, that they no longer have access to. So we're trying to see, again, ask what is going to benefit Picuris Pueblo. Thank you for your patience.
Questions, comments, protests. This is a library. Say what you want. Dr. Tollett's going to have the first question.
Okay, I know in old Aribe, when you sit, they sat at certain places, And when the sun came up in certain places, that was when they knew to plant particular plants. Did they do that there too?
You know, it's interesting you mentioned places because this sample was taken, if the kiva is a clock, it was taken at about 3 p.m. And when we mentioned this, the governor said, I'm not telling you who sits there, but I know the people that usually sit there, and those things are associated with them, especially the animals with their pelts and that sort of thing. So he said, makes perfect sense. If you went on the other side of the kiva, you'd probably get different stuff. In terms of the species, plants and animals, it's making a lot of sense.
How important was the sun for them?
Astoundingly important. 2-minute anecdote here. Another one of the beauties of working with a living community. We have done survey on their tribal lands, and 5 years ago, I was working with my students. They ticked me off. It was about 10 in the morning. I just said, keep working, I'm gonna go for a walk. Walked to the top of a hill, and there was what I thought was probably a shrine that we hadn't seen before. It was open to the east. It had a rock in the middle with a spiral on it, carved. So I went back and told our tribal liaison, Richard Mermejo, and he said, oh, well, that makes sense. That's where the old guys used to look every winter solstice, every time. So he said, so given that case, summer solstice should be over here. We got the readings off the geodetic survey, walked that way, we found their summer solstice shrine. So yeah, incredibly important directionality. And when I asked Richard, who has lived there, unfortunately the late Richard Mermejo, he said, you know, I never walked to the top of that hill. So he said, we just found some of our old shrines. So the beauty of collaboration. So that shrine is now back in the practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. Any questions, comments?
You were talking about taking the samples of for the DNA. How was that how do you say the material? How
was it collected?
you know, where it was kept and how did it get there and who put it there?
So getting it to Copenhagen, you mean? Or from the actual, how was it excavated from the Pueblo? In terms of human remains?
Right.
So when Herbert Dick was working at the Pueblo in the 60s, there was very little sensitivity to digging human remains. You dug them. And so he had dozens and dozens of human remains that he excavated. Today we do not do that. There's the Pueblo asks that any human remains we find we leave in place and we don't excavate them. But because he had dug them up and because he had them stored, we were able to sample them for the DNA material.
They were stored for how long?
They were in our cabinets at Taos from 1965 to 2020. It just shows you how difficult it is to know everything in your collections. To have something found after 40 years, 60 years, sorry, is a little sobering, a little makes you wonder what else is there. So we're working with Picuris to make sure we find everything.
Questions, comments?
I have a comment. Also, when I was with the Hopis, one of the things when I would get to go into up at the top of the kiva, because I couldn't go into the kiva, but the kachinas would be coming and they would be chanting. And with that architecture, you couldn't tell where they were coming from.
Yes.
It was spooky.
The acoustics of Pueblos, it's purposeful. The alleyways are used very effectively to channel sound. And in a kiva, they're I've been told, I haven't been in one with a roof, you can hear people whispering across the kiva. So not many secrets are told in kivas.
Questions, comments? We have some guests here that are future archaeologists.
I was going to say, genetics. Do genetics.
Okay, so some of these questions are more generic, but have you ever researched something that someone after you disproved because they had more advanced technology?
Oh, absolutely. I love to be wrong because it means we know more. Specific things that I've been proven wrong on. Yeah, I mean, one of the ancestral homes of Picuris Pueblo is on our campus in Taos. It's called Picuris Pueblo. And I was convinced that the Pueblo was burned in 1320 because of infected corn, what we call aflatoxin. Absolutely dead convinced. And we tested it, there's absolutely no aflatoxin in the corn. They did burn the Pueblo, but we don't, that wasn't why. So yeah, one of the things about science, and kids listen to this, science means putting your most precious ideas at risk. If you're not doing that, you're not doing science. You're covering your butt. So make sure that you are wrong several times.
And what are your favorite tools to use as an archaeologist?
My mind. My favorite tools, I've gotten, because my body is old and broken, I don't excavate as much. I'll tell you what my favorite are. It's what we call remote sensing. It's using satellites and LiDAR and stuff in drones to look for things on the landscape rather than walking and mapping.
Okay, and you also touched upon the population that went from several thousand to 300. Are there theories on what caused that decline? Was there an illness? Did people move to other parts? Like, what's the prediction?
I'll use kind of a harsh term that an anthropologist named Levine came up with: creeping genocide. It was a concatenation of diseases being made forced labor to build churches and to grow crops for European overlords. It was the forced labor that took away from ritual and well-being. And also, Picuris Pueblo was central to the 1680 Pueblo Revolt, when the Pueblo people kicked the Europeans out of the Southwest for 12 years. And when the Europeans came back, Picuris paid for it dearly. There was a second revolt tried in 1696 when Picuris fled after it failed. The Spanish caught up with the Picuris, who were fleeing to Kansas, a place called Cuartalejo, and now realize they're already in the hundreds. They captured 84 women and children, and they sold them into slavery. Never to return to Picuris. 84 people out of probably 400. So you see those sorts of really atrocious traumas led to the Picuris being around 300 people, and they have been around 300 people literally since 1700.
Okay, can I ask one more? I'm sorry to hog the time. Okay, you talked about all the artifacts at SMU. How do a bunch of kids go and look at those types of discoveries?
Thanks for asking. Every third Saturday of every month, our Archaeological Research Collections, ARC, hosts an open house and an open lab for students, for interested avocational archaeologists to come, help organize, sort materials. Now, this is not stuff from Picuris, it's stuff from North Texas. It's stuff from reservoir projects, from other projects, but please do come. Matt Boulanger is the director of the ARC. Just, if you look online, every third Saturday, all day long, it is open. Everybody is welcome to come either look and or get involved. We have volunteers from the North Texas Archaeological Society that have been coming now for a year and a half, every third Saturday. So please become part of it. Matt would love to have all of you there.
And then do you have a favorite project that you've worked on since you started in archaeology?
This is it. Working with Picuris on their DNA, I think, is my favorite project.
Questions, comments, protests? Up in the front, okay.
I'll make it quick. So this is a question about ethics, but not really in the way that you already discussed. You were setting out with best intentions when starting this DNA study. The tribe obviously was up against a wall. They saw the federal government creeping in. There's a lot of money in the oil and gas legal teams. It's not something they could just sit with. If your research had proven that they were not related to the original inhabitants, there was a very real possibility that that would have been the worst case, and you would have destroyed a lot of the day-to-day life and attachment that these people had to the land. Mm-hmm. Personally, did that keep you up at night? Is that something you and your team looked at to say, should we even do this? Are they best off just fighting it? Because this is a Hail Mary for them. I'm sure you were certain, but...
Here's the thing, and Picuris is really adamant about this getting known. They are the only ones who've proven this genetically. They at no point will ever contest that other tribes are affiliated. They know they are. So the other 18 federally recognized Pueblos, Picuris will say they're going to be related to. Somebody had to do this first, though, to get interest and show proof of concept. Did I lay awake at night? Absolutely. Because here's my other concern. As a scientist, you're supposed to put your most cherished beliefs at risk. We had agreed with Picuris that at any point they could pull the plug. So being a scientist and doing all this research and then getting negative results and having Picuris say, you can't publish it, that was a real possibility. That's not how science is supposed to be done, but is how ethical collaborations have to be done. You have to, I consider it, I'm working in a foreign country. If the host country doesn't like what I've done, they can kick me out and they can kill the data. That's one of the risks you take, working with a tribal sovereign nation. It's a risk I was willing to take, especially because it was a risk they were taking. They were putting themselves in harm's way much more than my findings and career. So I hand that to them.
Thank you.
You bet. And I also want to shout out to, again, Richard Mermejo. I can't express enough. He was our tribal liaison. He was our guide. He was our spiritual leader. He was the one who, until he passed away last year, was an advocate for this, a tribal elder, a tribal leader, and it's very hard to express the heroic efforts of someone like that.
That was a good question, thank you. Any other last minute questions? We have an expert here. We don't always have an expert, so we have one tonight. Questions, comments? I'll ask the last two questions since there's none. I'm really impressed with the directional aspect of those roads.
Yeah. And guess what there also are at Picuris? Roads. One of their rituals that they have every year is the race course, where the two halves, the moieties, north and south, race against one another. Those are Chaco roads, folks. And they're just made of dirt, not stone, like in Chaco. So, and they have roads like that go straight for miles. So, again, interesting thing about Picuris, not to launch into something else. The reason the Picuris people there are there in 900 AD, get this, they don't want to be part of Chaco. They actually are non-believers. So it's interesting to me that they move as far away from Chaco as they can. They don't have Chaco architecture. They may have some roads, but they don't do the Chaco thing. And here they are related to them. So another conundrum.
Since we are at the upper reaches of we're near the upper reaches of the East Fork Trinity River, can you tell us not what others are doing currently on research along the Trinity River, particularly the East Fork?
Yeah, there's a great deal of research into Caddo, Caddo ancestry that's going on in the area. Again, there are hints of the relationships between the Pueblo Southwest and this area. We find turquoise out here. There's bows that are found out in the Southwest. So there clearly was interaction, trade between these areas. I am the last person to ask about North Texas archaeology, though. I deal with mesas and deserts.
Just for the lay audience, this area, Collin County, did not have silver and gold and turquoise. The New Mexico area did. But Collin County had bodark, and bodark was just as coveted as we covet gold because of its sturdy quality. Anyway, and there's evidence of cross-trade between New Mexico and Collin County.
And guess what? I won't be surprised to find bodark DNA in the Southwest with more research that's being done.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.